Ryan Stanton here with ASAP Frontline here at Scientific Assembly, and we are talking with Dr. Torree McGowan. She has been one of our guests before. You've seen her a number of times. Well, actually, this may be the first time you're seeing her if you're on the online version. But from us here talking, we talk quite a bit, especially with your history with military. Awesome person, awesome doc, great conversation all the time. But here you're talking about the aviation to achievement, bringing airline safety in the ED. Of course, this one is when I'm screening the discussions. It's anything I see this aviation as a pilot, I'm like, there, we're going to do it.
I knew you'd be interested, yeah.
Of course, your name is on there, so that made it an easy decision. So, yeah, kind of give us a low-case lowdown on this talk.
Well, the hard part about this is I am only half of the lecture team that is talking about this. The Thelma to my Louise is one of my very best friends. His name is Jeremy McClellan, and he is a commercial airline pilot. His expertise is in human factors analysis and safety, and he is one of the national leading experts in human factors analysis. He and I were actually college classmates at the Air Force Academy, and when we both graduated, I went to medical school, and he went to pilot training. And when I would talk about, I'm on my 36th hour of ICU call, he'd be like, that's crazy. How are you guys safe? And the answer was, we probably aren't very safe. So it was really interesting to watch as he progressed through the pilot training world and flew F-15s. I almost said 16s, and that almost got me unfriended right there. F-15s with the Air Force, and then transitioned over into the commercial airline world. How very different we look at safety and how very differently they approach it than what we do. And so these series of lectures, we spoke for the first time last year at ASAP, and then they invited us back again this year to kind of expand on some of those ideas, really just grew out of those conversations of Jeremy and I sitting down and talking about what our experiences were and were different, and how we can learn from each other. And so that we explored that a little bit last year about some of the things that the airlines have done that have really taken their error rate incredibly low. And the feedback from last year's lecture was, that's great information. How do I bring this to my ER today? Because there's a lot of this that is big policy changes and changing how we do medicine in general. But some of it are things that we can change in our own practice tomorrow to make your practice a little bit safer. And so that was what we talked about this year of what is one piece of how aviation is so much safer that you could try tomorrow at your shift and is proven to decrease error rates.
And we know that from the aviation industry because it's so public, because it's so obvious. When a plane has an issue, it makes the news. It doesn't matter, even though it's the safest mode of transportation that we have in this country and around the world. But they've got these, from everything from checklists down to rules, restrictions on your work hours, rest hours, of course, the substance and medication-based restrictions. You look at all of these things, these rules, especially for the pilots, but also for the airline in general, to keep the numbers so incredibly low as they are. So let's dive into it. What are some of the things that we can take home from that? Because as you mentioned, for the emergency medicine, just the way we do it is just at the airlines. If they functioned like an emergency department, they would all be shut down with the number of crashes they were having.
Absolutely. And one thing that's a little bit frustrating about starting this work, and Jeremy and there certainly have been people talking about it, but I have that secret weapon of an actual expert that is living that world and able to bring it to us. And then I just translate what is aviation doing that we're able to do here in the Air Force. And in the medical field, some of that is my Air Force experience, because you just learn to think in that aviation way in the military and in the Air Force. But the biggest criticism that I hear is there's so much that needs to be done. We're never going to get there. And maybe that's true, but aviation has been evolving over 50 years to get to the point where they're safest. We have to have that same mindset that, is it going to change things tomorrow? Absolutely not. But slow, iterative change and getting a little bit safer every time, that's a great goal, because every time we get safer, that's one more patient that we can save. And so one of the things that we focused on during this lecture was the idea of briefings and the threat forward briefing. So one thing that pilots do when they sit down and they get ready to push from the gate, is they say, what threats do you see out there? We don't really think about threats to our practice. When you come into a shift and you look at the board and there's every bed is full with a boarder and you're doing things in the waiting room, that's a threat. We don't think about it that way, and we don't think about that's going to make my shift harder, and I need to allow for that. And how do I mitigate that threat? If I don't have beds upstairs, if I don't have transport today, if the weather is bad, that's all going to impact my shift. And in the back of my mind, now that I think about that as I'm driving in, wow, the roads are really bad. If I have to have a transport, I need to be thinking about how can I get that patient there safely. And maybe that means that I'm calling for transport earlier. Maybe that means that I'm thinking about how I have to stabilize that patient a little bit better because I know they're going to be on the road a little bit longer. But without that very conscious thought of what is going to make my job harder today, what is going to be a threat to my patients, we don't really have a plan to deal with that. And so the idea that aviation uses is what they call threat and error management. And the idea is if you can look for all of the ways that this could go wrong and have a plan for dealing with that, you are much less likely to be surprised and not have an idea of what to do. And we have things that we know are going to go wrong with, or we talk about complications. So when we brief a patient on what's going to happen with a procedure, we tell them here are the risks and benefits. The risks are our threats. Could I injure an adjacent structure? Could I miss that intubation? And when we go through those, great, now what's your plan to deal with each one of those? The other thing that they talk about in the airline industry is how do you deal with unexpected threats? We're pretty good with expected threats if we think about them. But if you don't think about everything, if you don't think about your threats, everything's going to be an unexpected threat because you didn't have a plan to deal with it. Unexpected threats are, hey, you were here for an ankle sprain, but all of a sudden you decided to code. That wasn't what I had on my plan for what was going to happen today, but I know how to deal with that because I know how to deal with the unexpected threats that we see in the emergency room every day. And just like aviation has, they're called bold faces. If something goes bad, if you stall an aircraft, roll wings level, nose down, recover, right? That's a very simple bold face, and every pilot will know that one. We all know ABCs. We all know ACLS. We have bold faces, but we don't think about that in our toolbox of if something has gone terribly wrong and surprised me, what is in my toolbox to deal with those unexpected threats? And it's a mind shift of instead of assuming everything's going to go right, let's assume how this could go wrong and look for ways that we have a plan to deal with that so that we're not so startled by it.
And we got the same idea. I mean, looking at, they said we got a VL. We don't necessarily need the DL, and we don't necessarily need a Bronc. We don't need the Bougie. We don't need all that stuff because we got this. So it absolutely does make sense. And you talked about the aviation side of it. When I'm putting together a flight plan, looking for the weather, looking for potential turbulence, looking for, whatever the transitions, airspace, restricted areas, those types of things like that. But, most people on the plane, I don't know if I doubt it's this way on commercial, but when I'm flying a plane, a small plane, every second that I'm not doing something in the flight, I'm looking for where I'd land the plane.
Yeah.
And so whether it's a field, whether it's a road, especially at night, night is nonstop. How far is the nearest airport? All these things like that. So if there were a catastrophic failure of the engine, where would I safely put this thing down?
Yeah.
And so it's like constant. You don't do that when you're driving a car. You don't think about if my engine goes out or I blow a tire, where am I going to pull over? What am I going to do about it? With healthcare, the complete idea of the boarding, the transports, the staffing, for me, the big one is staffing, walking in. This is tonight, we have to have this portion of ED3 closed by 10 p.m. and all this other stuff. It's with your discussion with bringing the aviation aspect of it, what are the other things that right now these listeners can go through and say, I can start doing this, and it's not going to take a huge capital lift in 50 years to put together?
Yeah. So one of the things that we talk about a lot in this idea of this threat and error management is the reason that we make bad decisions when something happens is our amygdala takes over. and we go into fight or flight mode. And especially as physicians, there's a tremendous amount of pressure to do something. The nurse comes to you and says, something has happened. You want to go in there and you want to give a drug, or you want to put in a line, and there's so much pressure. And we talk about this a little bit in medicine. Most of us have heard the adage of, what's the first thing you check in a code? Your own pulse. Exactly. Drawing on psychology and drawing on those ideas of human factors, which is everything that impacts us, that we bring to work, that interacting with the equipment, interacting with the patients, interacting with others, everything that the human part of the job impacts. We know that through that research that when we have that shock startle response, our brains don't work well, and it starts to fall back on biases. Bias is really important in our brains because it allows us to deal with a world that our brains aren't able to interpret entirely correctly. There's too much information. Sometimes there's not enough information. Sometimes you don't know what information is important, and our brains take shortcuts. We know these. We know confirmation bias. We know anchoring bias. Planned continuation bias is another one that's really important. Hey, I thought that guy was going to go home and something pops up. That lab was unexpected. You know what? Maybe I need to go ahead and change my mind on that. And what you do when that shock startle event happens, amygdala takes over, and we want to do something. How do you change that? The skills that Jeremy teaches is you want to make time and you want to expand your team. So in aviation, they talk about no-time events. You have to act right now. And no-time events in aviation are fire in the aircraft, smoke in the airplane, and security threats. Everything else, you have time to think through. And for those no-time events, there are 3 steps to turn that into into an event where you have time to think through and think constructively about what you need to do. Airplane's on fire? Great. There are 2 buttons that he has to hit and draw the throttles back, and now he can think about it. We're that way in medicine too, but we don't think about that. So our no-time events in medicine are codes, security threats, and environmental threats. If you have the tornado bearing down on you, you really have to act at that point. Other than that, everything else is a time event, and you have time to think and use that part of your brain that is not relying on bias. Gather information from your team. Think through your actions. So when a code happens for us, that's our no-time event. We have our boldface. We have our critical actions that we fall back on. Airway, breathing, circulation, start compressions. And at that point, now we switch over into the thinking part of our brain to go through your H's and T's. You're looking for what caused that, and we are now working through that differential to stabilize that patient. That doesn't mean you have to do it immediately. You have time now because you've addressed the immediate life threat. Just that change in your thinking that now I have a little bit of time will again allow your brain to start accessing those parts and get out of that bias that's going to lead you astray. The other thing that we emphasize is expand your team. And your team can be a lot bigger than you think of. We think of nurses. What about your respiratory therapists? Don't forget you have consultants that are available by phone. For the new residents, you still remember the phone number to your old residency? There is an attendee or attending available to you that you can run that case by. In the airline industry, they talk about somebody who is at 0 knots and 1G. So that was an idea that really resonated with me because in aviation safety, the pilots have a very vested interest in not crashing because they get to the accident a half a second before everybody else. And so when things are going badly, if they're having an emergency, what they do is they will get a pilot on the ground on the phone, and that pilot, as well as their first officer, if it's the captain or whatever, the first officer is working, there's a pilot on the ground working, and that pilot on the ground, he's safe. He's not going to crash with them. And being able to remove that for somebody who is at 0 knots, so they're not moving, and 1G, so they can't crash, is an incredibly powerful way to, again, access somebody's brain that isn't being overtaken by that stress and startle response. We have that available to us, but we don't think about it. We don't think about accessing those other team members that aren't as invested in that code that's going on in that patient that's crashing, that can help us, again, think through a problem in a more systematic format and feed that information back to you. One of the things that I love to do with this is when I have a bad pediatric patient coming in that I know that's coming, I'll call my pediatrician down and I'll say, here's the deal. You don't have to run the resuscitation. Your only job is to back me up on dosing and make sure that I'm dosing appropriately for whatever I'm calling out. And I can offload that cognitive bandwidth to somebody. It's so incredibly helpful because that's one of the most stressful parts of it for me because I don't do public math. But somebody else now has that job that I know and trust, and that team member is helping me deal with that, again, what I know I'm not going to do well, and makes that resuscitation move smoother.
So kind of get us put a bow on it, wrap up the discussion. Anything else you want everybody to know today?
So if I could do one thing for people to take home, the idea of when you get to work, do a briefing with your charge nurse. Hey, what's happening today? What's my bed status? What's going on? Every time I see a patient, I actually do kind of a little mini briefing with my patient. And I love it when the nurse is in the room because I say, hey, here's what I think we're going to do. We're going to check some labs. We're going to do some imaging. I need a urine sample from you. The patient is now part of your team. And the number of times that somebody pees without giving me a urine sample has gone significantly down because now we're all part of that collaborative healthcare team and everybody knows where we're going to land, if you will. Anytime a nurse comes to you and says, hey, I need you to look at bed 10. Great, let's go to the bedside together and let's do a briefing. What threat did you see that developed since the last time I was in here? And looking at those ideas of that each one of those times is another time to bring that team together, brief through what everyone is seeing, and look forward to how that threat's going to impact your plan. Airlines do it every single time they push back from the gate and every time that they are starting to descend because something has changed in their flight plan. Not even something's changed in their flight plan. They are transitioning to a new event in their flight. They rebrief as here's what's going to happen. Does anybody see any threats that are new that we didn't anticipate? If you're not doing it for procedures, you absolutely should be. Then the literature out there is very powerful. In one study that looked at before you start an anesthesia induction, if they do a brief that says, here's the medications that we're planning to use, here is the duration of the procedure, 34% of the time they identified a major issue and were able to correct that before induction happened. These are powerful, easy tools, and it seems almost silly to talk about them because they're almost too easy. And it feels a little artificial sometimes or a little bit silly, but the number of times that I have not forgotten to pull propofol to keep somebody sedated once I started doing briefings with my team, I don't even like to count how many times because it tells me how many times I would have forgotten and somebody would have been paralyzed and not sedated, which is not fantastic. So it's a powerful tool that seems almost too easy to use and absolutely makes patients safer.
How can folks get in touch with you? Do you have any more questions?
You can email me, torreemcg@me.com. I'm assuming you guys will put contact information in show notes, and happy to speak with anyone.
All right, thank you so much. Talking with Dr. Torree McGowan. She's our resident Air Force military contact that we have, and appreciate the topics. As for me, contact me, rstan@acep.org, rstan@acep.org, at EverydayMed on X, and make sure that you're subscribed to every podcast. And until next time, I'm Dr. Ryan Stanton, and this has been some ACEP Frontline.
If you're not on the front lines, you're on the sidelines.
Cue the music.
Bow, bow, bow.
Ding. Quiet place, all
Yeah.
alone. Da, da, da.